Good morning, everyone. I was just saying earlier that the last time I was at this venue, I was wearing a different hat in a different organisation. I was a regulator, and there was a chap in the audience sitting right in the middle who clearly didn't like us and didn't like me. And he was big, and he just kept staring at me constantly. It was quite hostile. But anyway, I'm hoping it won't be today, but you can tell me at the end. So hands up, who has heard of or knows of AVMA? Anyone in the audience? One, two, few hands. Right, okay, that's very helpful to know. That gives me a clue as to where I've got to go with my slides, so thank you very much. So what I was going to do today is just say a bit about AVMA, who we are. I'm going to talk, because I think we can, and I'll be able to complement some of what Naomi has said about what harm patients really want, based on hundreds of thousands of conversations we have had with them over many, many years, including up until yesterday. By the way, as of yesterday, did anyone hear the Mariopi interview on Radio 4 yesterday morning about Martha's story? Anyone hear that yesterday? Anyone moved to tears by that? Incredible story. Amazing. I mean, and what a time to be involved in patient safety. There's been that. And of course, most recently, Lucy Letby, which at one level you can't think, well, it's not really about patient safety, it's about sort of murder. I mean, it's horrible. But actually, I think there's all sorts of things in that story. It's not a story, it's a crime that actually point to wider patient safety concerns. I've spoken and I've written a lot about that in the last few weeks. If anyone wants to follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, please do, and I will continue to write about some of those issues. But anyway, let me say a little bit about AVMA. Action Against Medical Accidents. So we are an independent charity for patient safety and justice. The justice element of this gets us into clinical negligence, people's ability, the high bar there is. People think it's all very easy just to sort of bring a case. It's not. To actually prove a case in law is incredibly difficult. There is no legal aid. You are in all sorts of challenging areas around that. So actually one of the things we do is we accredit, and we have accredited for many years, specialist lawyers who deal with that sort of work, because actually we think most lawyers cannot and should not deal with that sort of work. It's highly specialist. You need to know what you're really doing. Otherwise you're going to waste people's time and you're going to waste money, which on top of what's already happened is not helpful. So we provide, one of the key things we do, we provide independent specialist advice and support to those who have been affected by avoidable harm. We do actually work in partnership with all sorts of organisations, the NHS, private healthcare, professionals, government departments, lawyers, campaigners, and there are many campaigners out there now. Many work with us, many have gone off on their own, and many people have lots to say about this very, very important subject. And we hope that as well as doing all of that listening, support and help, that actually we too can contribute to bringing about change, because from our insights we try to share those back too, so that we can help bring about a difference. We want to make a difference. So one of the ways we did that was through the Mid-Staffs inquiry back in 2013, where we were one of the key campaigners for a duty of candour, which Naomi talked about earlier. So it was one of the things we had been campaigning for many, many years, along with others. We weren't alone, but there have been many people, and us gave evidence about that, and it came out of that inquiry. There have been many other things going all the way back that we've campaigned for to bring about change. So a bit more about us. Being a charity, we don't have any state funding. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? When I look at our accounts, as I will later on, sometimes I think it's a bad thing. I'm running a deficit budget, but there we are. Everything we therefore spend, we have to work like everyone else to raise the funds for, etc., etc. We actually founded just over 40 years ago, and here's a serendipity, as a consequence of a play that was on the BBC called Minor Complications, about a woman who went into hospital, has an operation, and it all went horrendously wrong. And it was a play on television, based on a true story, but it was a play. And the BBC were inundated with phone calls. They could not cope. So they contacted the playwright and said, you've got to do something. He didn't know what to do, so he wrote a letter to a newspaper, said, does anyone want to help me? A few people responded, and they formed a group, and the group became a charity, and they went from there. And they started with a loan, And then they set up a helpline, and then they went on and they built it and they developed it. And 40 years on, we are here. And the playwright is still alive, and he's still writing age 91 plays for television when he can, which I find amazing. We have 21 staff, so we're small and perfectly formed. We actually have 100 volunteers. The volunteers actually operate our helpline for us, which is open 5 days a week. We have 10 trustees. The helpline is core to what we do. It's not the only thing we do, but it's absolutely core because it's a key way that people can contact us, talk to us, get support. They are talking to a lawyer when they call us. We'll give them advice, and it can be about anything from, actually, I'm not sure, I think something's not right here, what do I do? And that might be about going back, explaining about talking, trying to get some help, assistance, maybe making a complaint, or it could be all the way through to catastrophic injuries, which we think were, unfortunately, didn't come about for good reasons. So a whole raft of things we do with. This year, like most years, we'll probably speak to about 3,000 people. We have spoken to hundreds of thousands over our 40 years of existence. So we have quite a body of evidence about what people actually want. And we can go beyond the story, to use that word, and talk about some evidence. So, and the evidence comes from a number of places. We've got our evidence, but there's also been various inquiries, reports about this subject over many years. One of the first was back in 2013, which was jointly commissioned by Anne Clwyd, the MP, and Professor Hart, who was also a midwife and a nurse. And they were asked by the government to look at the whole sort of NHS complaints processes and whether they were working effectively. And they came back and they produced a report with lots of information, but they identified a number of missing components from kind of the processes of when things go wrong, such as lack of information, lack of compassion, lack of dignity, sometimes poor attitudes from clinical and non-clinical staff, and sometimes a lack of resources, basic supplies, things that were missing that could have helped solve and dealt with the problem. So, that's over 10 years ago now, we have that report. Naomi referenced this report, which her organisation produced, so she's already talked about this, but this very insightful report also identified a number of key issues that were missing in terms of what people, it was felt, really were lacking and what they wanted, about explanations, apologies, the confidence in terms of an investigation, compassion, reactions, and sometimes a dissatisfaction with the complaints process. So there's some themes emerging here from all of this. And then there's some of our own evidence of things, and I've just got a few sort of fairly typical quotes here of things that people have said to us down the line, but actually they say to us time and time again. I've sometimes sitting on our helpline, just listen to what people are contacting us about, what they want to talk about, what's concerning them, just try to pick up some trends of what's going on each day, each week. So I don't want other women to go through this. That's a very common reaction in terms of people saying, I don't want someone else to have to suffer this way. I want the learning from this. I want it not to happen again. I'm powerless to get any sort of response. Help us to navigate the system. So, the NHS, it's wonderful in so many ways, but it is a massive bureaucracy with many, many subcomponent parts. Navigating it, if you don't understand it, can be incredibly difficult. So people just often come to us saying, I'm just stuck. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to ask. I want an explanation. I want a detailed explanation of what's happened. So again, we get lots of that. And then I've raised multiple concerns here about the treatment. None have been explained or resolved satisfactorily. So there's lots of these sorts of phrases, words, people that we get coming to us. I was on our helpline a couple of weeks ago. A gentleman phoned in, very articulate. His wife, very sadly, had, I think, stage 4 lung cancer, had been given a few months to live, was then suddenly taken into A&E and died very quickly, very suddenly, in his view. And in his view, she had been advanced towards death very quickly by the powerful painkillers that she'd been given. I don't know whether that was correct or not. And he said to the helpline advisor, he said, I want a solicitor. I was thinking, why do you want a solicitor? That seems to be the last thing you want. Anyway, helpline advisor was very good, talked through all the issues, what had happened. He'd kept contemporaneous notes of every conversation, the drugs she'd been given, the fact he thought this was wrong, etc. And, then she explained about the sort of the high bar of litigation, that this probably was, wasn't going to be a great case to fight. And he said, no, I want a solicitor to help me, to advocate for me, because I want to get an explanation and an answer. I was thinking, the penny dropped. It wasn't about a solicitor, it wasn't about suing, it was about someone to help him to get what he really wanted, which was an explanation, which was just lacking. He said, the door's been slammed in my face, no one's talking to me, and I don't trust them anymore. Oh dear. So actually that's the real problem here. It's that lack of that entry point and the trust. Whatever was going on there, maybe had gone into defensive mode because he was saying, I want to get a solicitor. So they were saying, well, we're not going to apologise, and then it all escalates and ramps up. So there we go. So I sum all this up into 5 A's. You can take away 5 A's today from this talk. People want an acknowledgement. They want an acknowledgement that something has gone potentially wrong. They want an apology. Naomi talked about apologising. They really do want that. They want some accountability. Now, whether that can be, and of course we get into issues here about, is that a head on a plate? Is that about blame? And it's not necessarily, many people, it's not about that. It is about some institutional accountability, or it could be personal, or it could be a mixture of both. People, and we recognise that often mistakes happen for all sorts of reasons. It's not because people set out to deliberately do that. Of course they don't. And they're working in complex systems with complex processes that can drive that forward. So of course that can lead to harm to happen. So it's about the totality of the accountability, not just about blame. We're not about that. People then want some action coming out of that. Will something be learnt from it? Will something be done? Going back to that woman earlier, I don't want this to happen to someone else. That's really important for people. And then they want some sense of access to justice here in all of this. That is that, and it could be all of those things above, an acknowledgement, an apology, that is their access to justice, that there's been a recognition of all of those things. Or it could be something else because they need to escalate it, but they need something that's appropriate. But actually often, some sort of restorative justice that tries to get the relationship back on an even keel is actually the most important thing. And we certainly don't encourage people to litigate. We recognise that actually the psychological impact of that can be as bad as the psychological impact of the harm that they've encountered and been involved with. So it's not something we set out to encourage people to do. I want to now say something about PSERF and compassionate engagement, and something that we're also been working on. I've been working on for a while with a group of stakeholders. We're calling it the Harmed Patient Pathway, and we think this might complement and support the very good work that's going on, I think, around PSERF, which I think can make a real difference, and particularly the compassionate engagement elements of that, if we can get that right. Big if there, isn't it, if we can get that right. So you'll recognise this slide. I've stolen this from Jono's work that he did around compassionate engagement and the documentation that NHS England produced around, this is the foundations of compassionate engagement. So I don't need to go through this. These are some of the things that NHS England have talked about in their own guidance. And they've also talked about this, about the steps of engagement, about before contact, about the contact itself, the continued contact investigation, and then closing that contact. So the kind of the stages of all of that, really important. And we think, and we were involved, we got involved in, NHS England very kindly involved us in some of the work around passionate engagement, compassionate engagement, because we clearly have an amount of experience that we can share around some of that, which we think is very important. So we're working with a number of patient groups and stakeholders to identify the needs that we think are created when healthcare harm happens, and the sort of support and responses that we think are really vital to meeting those needs. We think what we're trying to do complements, doesn't replace, compassionate engagement elements of PSERF. As I say, we're calling it a pathway, a harmed patient pathway, because we think there's some language which the NHS is used to around pathways for care and all of those things. And it's built around 6 core domains. which form a gap analysis that trusts can use to self-evaluate their current practice and see what they think might be missing, and then improve some of that work that they're all involved with now around embedding, hopefully, compassionate engagement. The 6 domains we've come up with, which is kind of almost like a flowchart of if these domains were all done and the gap analysis was all fulfilled, then we think that pathway for a harmed patient would be the one that leads to the best outcome that we can, given those unfortunate circumstances. So we start with communication with both the patients and the families as soon after the harm has happened as is possible. As soon as there is a void and there's a silence, people start to fill the gap. They fill the vacuum with their own thoughts about what's happened. So actually, communication is always absolutely key. What then happens around the provision of signposting and support to those families, those people? How do you help them with that? How do you give them advice and support around that? What do you do for them? Who do you signpost them to? What if they do need other support? Do you facilitate that? Do you pay for that? Question of resources, of course. Involvement in the investigation. They should be involved in the investigation. They've got evidence. It's not just a story. They've got evidence. Now, it might be that their version of that evidence is different to the clinicians. Well, okay, then investigation needs to reconcile that and deal with that, doesn't it? But it is evidence and it should be considered. So they need to be involved in that. And the more they feel involved in that, the more trust and rapport you will build as a consequence of that. Many, not all, will also want to be involved in the patient safety improvement work that might come out of that, because people want there to be some sense of something's being done as a consequence. Going back to Mary OP yesterday on Radio 4, she wants something to come for that for her daughter so that she can look at that and say, I did something as a consequence. Now, not everyone is Mary OP doing that, but many, many people feel very passionately that they don't want that to happen to someone else. So how can they help go away thinking, okay, that did happen, but as a consequence, we got this improvement. What about the interaction with all the various other different processes that could be going on here? There could be a death, that could involve the coroner, so there could be all sorts of things going on there. How's the liaison working with all of that? There could be all sorts of processes going on here. The treatment could have involved various different aspects of the NHS, various aspects of the hospital. You know, is everyone talking and joined up about all of that? And then, of course, the widest one of all is actually what comes out of this in terms of culture and systems. We talk about a just culture in terms of the NHS, absolutely rightly. So how do we take the learning of this to improve and help embed and make better that just culture and change or improve any systems and learnings for systems that comes out of this? Because it's not always, in fact, it rarely is about the individual. It's often about the interaction of individuals with systems. So actually, what's the system changes we also need? Some NHS trusts have worked with us as well to pilot this gap analysis. Some of the patient safety teams in some trusts, a small number at the moment. The feedback has been really positive from them about how they found it a really helpful and insightful gap analysis that has helped them think more about compassionate engagement and how to embed that. So if you are out there in an NHS trust, you are thinking about compassionate engagement, you're struggling, you think this may be of help to you, then certainly I would encourage you to get in touch with me. You can email me. There's my email address, nice and simple, Paul at AVMA. Couldn't be easier. You can follow me on LinkedIn, on now called X, used to be called Twitter, didn't it? And we have a website as well. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope I've shared some insights about AVMA. I hope I've managed to bust some myths, and if you take away nothing else, take away 5 A's about what patients really want. Nice and simple to remember. So thank you very much. Thank you.